Love stories in hip-hop often play out like carefully scripted movies. Bold declarations, dramatic twists, glamorous highs, and very public heartbreaks. But every so often, reality turns out messier and more captivating than fiction. That's exactly what happened when Yo Gotti's long-shot fantasy about Angela Simmons went from a cheeky rap lyric to a headline-making romance. For a while, it seemed like a fairy tale. The rapper who spoke his truth, manifested his dream woman, and the business-savvy daughter of Rev Run finally opened her world to him. Yet, as the chapters unfolded, the dream began to unravel. What once looked like destiny has transformed into one of hip-hop's most watched dramas, complete with rumors, betrayals, legal storms, and the silence of a woman who chose dignity over spectacle. To understand how shocking this saga became, we have to rewind nearly a decade, back to 2015. At the time, Yo Gotti was already carving his place as one of Memphis's most successful rappers, but he wasn't the global household name he later became. Like many artists, he knew how to grab attention, but instead of relying on gimmicks, he did something that felt both outrageous and honest. He confessed his celebrity crush in the middle of a hit record. In his track Down in the DM, Gotti didn't mask his feelings with metaphor or clever wordplay. He flat out said it. He had a crush on Angela Simmons. To the casual listener, it may have sounded like just another flex, but in reality, it was an audacious gamble. Angela wasn't just anyone. She was the daughter of Joseph Rev Run Simmons of Run DMC fame. She grew up in the spotlight, built her own businesses, and carried the aura of someone untouchable. Most rappers would have admired her from a distance. Gotti, instead, put his feelings on wax for the entire world to hear. The public loved it. Fans laughed, shared the lyric across social media, and began rooting for him. It was bold, funny, and oddly wholesome in a genre that often celebrates casual encounters rather than long-term admiration. Over time, Yo Gotti shooting his shot at Angela Simmons became a cultural running gag. Interviewers asked him about it, blogs wrote listicles, and memes popped up about how he wasn't letting go of his crush. But beneath the internet's amusement was something more human: persistence. In an industry where most relationships are fleeting, Gotti's unwavering pursuit of Angela signaled something different. It wasn't about clout, it wasn't about business, and it wasn't about status. This was a man who seemed genuinely infatuated, who wanted the world to know he had eyes for one woman and wasn't ashamed to admit it. This persistence planted the seeds for one of hip-hop's most unexpected real-life romances. When people look back now, that lyric feels prophetic. What seemed like a playful crush on a superstar he'd probably never touch turned into a relentless pursuit that slowly wore down barriers. The lyric wasn't just entertainment. It was the opening line to a love story that for a moment felt like it might redefine celebrity relationships. Years passed, and what once seemed like nothing more than a meme-worthy confession began to gain traction in the real world. Angela Simmons, known for carefully protecting her personal life, was often asked about Gotti's crush. At first, she played coy, laughing off the viral line but never directly entertaining the possibility of romance. Fans assumed she'd never cross that line. After all, Angela had her own thriving career, her own standards, and her own reputation to uphold. Yet, behind the curtain, things were shifting. By the early 2020s, the industry had changed dramatically. Gotti wasn't just a rapper anymore. He had become a mogul, running CMG, Collective Music Group, signing stars, and commanding influence far beyond his own catalog. Angela, meanwhile, was balancing life as an entrepreneur, mother, and influencer. On paper, their worlds were different, but both were powerful in their own ways. Slowly, the distance that once made the romance seem impossible began to shrink. Then came the big reveal. In 2023, Angela Simmons posted a stunning photo of herself with Yo Gotti, confirming what many thought would never happen. Her caption read, "You're all I need." In that single moment, social media erupted. Fans who had watched the saga since 2015 celebrated as if they were part of the journey. Memes resurfaced of Gotti's famous lyric, now reframed as manifestation. The underdog rapper, who once confessed a crush, had, against all odds, won the heart of the woman he'd admired for years. From the outside, it looked like a modern fairy tale. Here was a man who proved persistence pays off. And here was a woman who decided to open her life to someone who had been publicly loyal from day one. Together, they projected stability and maturity, setting themselves apart from the chaos of younger celebrity pairings. Blogs labeled them hip-hop's grown couple goals, pointing to the rare combination of glamour and groundedness. But even as the world celebrated, subtle cracks were forming behind the polished images. The Instagram posts painted a picture of romance, but those who knew the couple privately whispered about struggles. Angela was juggling responsibilities as a mother and businesswoman. She wanted consistency, stability, and presence, not just public grand gestures. Gotti, on the other hand, was in the middle of one of the busiest seasons of his career, with CMG booming and his artists demanding constant attention. Still, in that moment, the relationship symbolized hope. For years, fans had followed this unusual courtship like a storyline, and now the dream had materialized. It seemed to validate the idea that fairy tales could be real, that persistence could pay off, and that celebrity love didn't always have to end in chaos. Unfortunately, as the story unfolded, that same fairy tale began unraveling in ways no one could have predicted. On the surface, the romance between Gotti and Angela Simmons looked flawless. An aspirational love story complete with luxury vacations, carefully curated Instagram moments, and the thrill of finally seeing persistence rewarded. But like many relationships that seem too good to be true online, the reality behind closed doors was more complicated. Angela, for one, had lived her entire life under public scrutiny. From her time on the reality series Run's House to her ventures in fashion and wellness, she had grown accustomed to people speculating about her choices. As a result, she valued privacy and authenticity above all else. To her, a relationship wasn't just about appearances. It was about building a foundation strong enough to weather the storms that came with fame. And according to insiders, cracks began to show when she felt her expectations of stability weren't being met. The reports began surfacing that Angela often felt like she was the one making sacrifices, while Gotti's world revolved around his music label. She wasn't naive. She knew he had responsibilities as a label executive, that his artists were blowing up, and that his presence was demanded at endless events. But as the months wore on, she allegedly began to notice a pattern. She was fitting herself into his schedule rather than feeling like a priority. This wasn't about insecurity. Angela had her own thriving empire. She ran fitness brands, fashion lines, and balanced her duties as a mother. She wasn't interested in playing the role of a background girlfriend. She wanted partnership, someone who could stand beside her in business and in life. That need clashed with Gotti's relentless hustle. While his career was reaching new heights, their relationship was quietly faltering. And then there was the pressure of public perception. Fans labeled them hip-hop's grown couple goals, a rare example of maturity in an industry where relationships often collapse under scandal. But the higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. Angela began to feel the weight of expectations, while Gotti, immersed in maintaining his empire, seemed less capable of noticing the small but crucial ways his partner was signaling distress. In private, sources claimed Angela was voicing her concerns, expressing that she needed more consistency and presence from him. But change never fully came. That imbalance fueled frustration. The Instagram perfect photos were masking arguments, doubts, and emotional distance. The love story that had been built on years of persistence was beginning to show signs of fragility. It's a reminder that even when relationships look polished from the outside, they often face challenges the world never sees. For Angela and Gotti, the challenge was simple but devastating. One partner felt like they were giving more than they were getting back. And that imbalance, left unchecked, set the stage for bigger problems that would soon play out in front of millions. Every great celebrity breakup has a tipping point, a moment when whispers turn into rumors, and rumors transform into undeniable public speculation. For Angela Simmons and Gotti, that moment came when business blurred uncomfortably into what looked like something more. At the heart of it was GloRilla, one of Gotti's breakout stars, signed to CMG. After her viral success with FNF Let's Go, she became the face of a new wave of Memphis rap. Her career was skyrocketing, and naturally, Gotti was heavily involved in nurturing her success. He was her label head, her mentor, and often her biggest cheerleader. To outsiders, it should have looked like nothing more than a professional relationship. But the way it played out online told a different story. First, there were the gifts, not the standard industry gestures like flowers or a congratulatory plaque. These were grand, extravagant, and personal. For GloRilla's birthday, Gotti reportedly pulled up with a brand new Maybach SUV, complete with a big red bow. This wasn't just a company perk. It was a $200,000 symbol of something deeper. Soon after, he topped that by gifting her an 18-karat Audemars Piguet Royal Oak watch worth around $65,000. Fans couldn't help but notice the extravagance and started asking the obvious. Why was a label boss spoiling his artist like a romantic partner? The internet, always quick to connect dots, began speculating about the nature of their bond. Social media users flooded comment sections, suggesting the relationship had gone beyond business. Memes circulated about CEO behavior, and fans joked that Gotti looked like a man in love, not just a mentor. Even though GloRilla never said anything incriminating, her constant presence and Gotti's lavish gestures were enough to keep the rumor mill spinning. And then came the moment that turned speculation into scandal. GloRilla embarrassed Gotti on Instagram Live. The details of the interaction weren't as important as the optics. It showed the world a side of Gotti that looked vulnerable, humiliated, and out of control. For someone who had spent years curating the image of a boss who always had it together, this was a devastating blow. Behind the scenes, Angela was watching. She had already been noticing signs that her relationship with Gotti was becoming strained, and now the rumors about his closeness with GloRilla were impossible to ignore. Even if nothing inappropriate happened, the public perception alone was damaging. To a woman who valued respect, loyalty, and stability, this was the kind of embarrassment she didn't want to tolerate. The irony is striking. Gotti had spent years chasing Angela, proving himself, and finally winning her over. But in the midst of success, his actions with an artist from his own label created the impression that he was neglecting the woman he had worked so hard to be with. Fans began asking, if he was treating GloRilla this way, what did that mean for Angela? It was a question Angela herself may have been asking too. In the end, the business entanglement became the breaking point. A relationship that had started as a dream was now tangled in public scandal, blurred boundaries, and humiliating moments that no amount of Instagram captions could cover up. When celebrity relationships collapse, the world often expects fireworks, angry tweets, shade-filled interviews, or messy public confrontations. But Angela Simmons chose a different path. Instead of matching the noise around her with more chaos, she embraced silence, dignity, and subtlety. In doing so, she sent a message louder than any rant could. Angela had always cultivated an image of grace. From her earliest days in the spotlight as Rev Run's daughter, she carried herself with composure, balancing her fame with an entrepreneurial drive and a commitment to family. That same grace defined how she handled her unraveling relationship with Gotti. While the internet buzzed about his closeness to GloRilla and dissected every public misstep, Angela made a conscious decision not to contribute to the frenzy. Her first signal came through Instagram. She shared a quote on her story that read, "I want what wants me. What flows, flows. What goes, goes." At face value, it looked like one of those motivational blurbs people post for aesthetic reasons. But in context, it was a declaration. This wasn't a woman clinging to something uncertain. This was a woman affirming that she valued reciprocity. If her love wasn't returned with the same energy, she wouldn't force it. Fans quickly interpreted the post as her way of bowing out without ever mentioning names. Then came her appearance on the Angie Martinez show. When asked if she was single, Angela gave an answer that has since become a touchstone in the narrative. "Not by choice, but I respect him. Some things are better left unsaid." Those few words carried immense weight. "Not by choice" implied she still had love for Gotti, or at least once believed in what they had. But "some things are better left unsaid" revealed volumes without directly airing dirty laundry. It suggested she knew more than she let on, perhaps about GloRilla, perhaps about Gotti's distractions, but chose not to weaponize that knowledge. Fans applauded her restraint. In a culture addicted to drama, Angela's calm response was refreshing. She didn't need to post cryptic rants, block him publicly, or call him out by name. Instead, she modeled what it looks like to walk away with dignity. That silence also left space for fans to fill in the blanks, and in some ways, it amplified the narrative even more. The less she said, the more powerful her message became. For Angela, a quiet exit wasn't just about self-preservation, it was strategic. As a businesswoman, she knew her brand thrived on positivity, health, and empowerment. Getting entangled in messy public drama would clash with everything she had built. Instead, she let her actions do the talking. She poured energy into her ventures, spent time with her son, and projected the image of a woman thriving independently. And perhaps most telling of all, she didn't try to humiliate Gotti. Even when the world turned against him, she refused to pile on. Her silence was, in many ways, the final act of respect. But make no mistake, silence doesn't equal weakness. For Angela, it was the ultimate mic drop, proving she didn't need to shout to make her decision clear. If Angela's quiet exit was graceful, Gotti's side of the story looked like the complete opposite. What began as the realization of his dream quickly spiraled into a public unraveling, leaving him vulnerable in ways fans had never seen before. At first, Gotti had everything: the respect of the industry, a booming label in CMG, and the woman he had admired for years. But as Angela quietly distanced herself, the cracks in his image widened. Then came the Instagram Live incident with GloRilla, which left him humiliated before millions. In an instant, his reputation as a composed, in-control boss took a hit. Fans who once celebrated him for manifesting his dream girl now mocked him as someone fumbling it all. The fallout extended beyond romance. Around the same time, whispers about potential legal trouble began circling CMG. Ever since the Young Dolph murder trial gained renewed attention, Gotti's name kept cropping up in industry conversations. Though nothing was confirmed, even the faintest whiff of a RICO case is enough to send shockwaves through hip-hop circles. For an artist like GloRilla, new, hot, and in demand, the association became a liability. It's no wonder she began to distance herself too. Suddenly, Gotti was watching two pillars of his world crumble simultaneously: his relationship and his business. Angela, who had once represented stability and maturity in his life, was gone. GloRilla, the rising star who had boosted CMG's profile, was pulling back. And the internet wasn't letting him forget it. Memes painted him as desperate. Blogs dissected every rumor, and fans debated whether this was the end of Gotti's golden era. Insiders whispered that Gotti tried to reverse the tide. He allegedly sent flowers to Angela, made late-night phone calls, and even reached out through mutual friends, hoping for another chance. But the narrative was no longer in his control. Angela had moved on, at least emotionally. And GloRilla's distance underscored how unstable his empire had become. The once powerful mogul now looked like a man scrambling to hold on to everything slipping through his fingers. The optics were brutal. Years of persistence had earned him Angela, but his inability to maintain the relationship and the perception that he was entangled with his artist undermined the victory. Fans who had rooted for his fairy tale love story were now questioning whether he ever truly valued it. This fallout didn't just bruise his personal life, it dented his brand. In hip-hop, image is everything. Gotti had built his reputation as a boss who always came out on top, who manifested his desires into reality. But now, he looked vulnerable, even desperate, as both love and loyalty slipped away. For a man who once rapped boldly about chasing his crush, the irony was painful. After finally winning Angela, he became the one begging not to lose her. After the dust settled and the headlines started piling up, Gotti's actions made it clear he wasn't ready to let Angela Simmons go. Reports surfaced that he was pulling out all the stops to win her back. Lavish flower deliveries, endless phone calls, and even attempts to set up private sit-downs where they could talk things through. Friends close to both hinted that he was leaning on mutual connections, hoping someone could convince Angela to hear him out. But no matter what moves he made, Angela's stance didn't change. She stayed quiet, focused on her son and her businesses, and kept moving forward as if the noise didn't exist. For Gotti, the silence was devastating. Publicly, it made him look like he was chasing someone who had already moved on. Privately, it underscored the reality. Angela wasn't waiting around for him to get it together anymore. The internet, of course, turned the situation into a spectacle. Social media thrives on downfall stories, and this one had all the ingredients: romance, betrayal, celebrity status, and receipts from years of public pursuit. Memes flooded Twitter and Instagram, painting Gotti as a man who went from manifesting his dream girl to begging for a second chance after fumbling her. From boss to begging became a recurring theme in comment sections, highlighting just how far his image had fallen. Yet not everyone was mocking him. A segment of fans still rooted for reconciliation, pointing out that Gotti had chased Angela for years and maybe deserved another shot. They argued that love stories aren't always neat, and perhaps this was just a rough chapter in a longer tale. But others weren't convinced. To them, Angela had handled herself with too much grace to go backward. They admired her silence, interpreting it as strength, and urged her to continue moving forward without looking back. Meanwhile, GloRilla's role in the saga kept fueling speculation. Even though she never publicly disrespected Angela, her presence and the gifts she received were loud enough to make fans question Gotti's priorities. The Instagram Live humiliation only amplified the perception that Gotti had lost control of his narrative. And in hip-hop, perception often matters more than reality. What made the situation even more compelling was the contrast between the two central figures. Angela radiated calm independence, glowing in a way that suggested she was happier without the drama. Gotti, on the other hand, looked like a man scrambling to reclaim the stability he once had. The imbalance was stark, and the internet ate it up. In the end, this saga is more than a tabloid headline. It's a story about ambition, persistence, and what happens when reality collides with fantasy. Yo Gotti spent years telling the world he wanted Angela Simmons, and against all odds, he got her. For a moment, it looked like the perfect story. The rapper who spoke his truth manifested his dream girl, and the woman who seemed untouchable gave him a chance. But love isn't built on persistence alone. It requires balance, respect, and presence. And when those pieces go missing, even the strongest fairy tale can collapse. Angela Simmons chose grace, walking away without anger or spectacle. Yo Gotti, once the victor of a long pursuit, found himself humbled, chasing what he had already lost. And GloRilla, caught in the middle of the noise, stepped back to protect her own rising star. Now, the internet continues to watch, speculate, and debate what comes next. Will Angela ever look back? Will Gotti bounce back from this very public fall? Or will this remain a cautionary tale about how chasing a dream is one thing, but keeping it requires something more? One thing's certain, in the world of hip-hop, where love, loyalty, and legacy collide under the brightest lights, nothing fades quietly. Every move leaves an echo, every silence leaves a mark. And the way this story ends will determine not just how fans remember Yo Gotti and Angela Simmons, but how they remember one of the most unusual love stories hip-hop has ever witnessed.